Hi, this is Fred, head coach at Yousuli. Welcome to the Epic Endurance Podcast. Today we are going to talk about fueling and more precisely how to drink during your training and racing. It is important to understand that there are a couple of things that comes down to fueling. One is going to be hydration and the other one is going to be the energy intake. Now, today we are going to focus mostly on the hydration part, which is also very important and is often done poorly by many athletes. Why is hydration strategy important during your training and your racing? Improper hydration strategy will decrease performance. If you do not bring back liquid into your body, you will affect a couple of processes. Namely, you will impair your ability to absorb carbohydrates or energy through training. So if your stomach is always empty, then the ability for your body to absorb carbohydrates will be limited. Gastric emptying will be slowed down, which is not a good thing when you want to maintain high performance. You will also impair your ability to regulate your temperature. And if you overheat, if your body reaches certain temperature, then first performance will be affected because some mechanism will force you to shut down and slow down to prevent damage from being made. Your decision ability will be also impaired. In terms of performance, high dehydration will also affect other markers like VO2 max. Not hydrating properly will impair your health and can cause issues with your kidneys. For athletes that do use non-steroid pain relief medication like ibuprofen, dehydration and this kind of medicine is not very good. Extreme dehydration and training also can lead to condition like rhabdo. It can become a life-threatening condition. Going to extreme dehydration, you increase your risk of heat stroke, you increase your risk of making poor decisions. In some ultra endurance races, such as ultra marathons, they will sometimes weight you at different stages, and if they see that your body weight has dropped by more than 5%, they will probably just make you stop. So maintaining a healthy weight or liquid loss in your race is important. Number 3, understanding that hydration is not only water replacement. I have unfortunately seen a couple athletes passing away due to overhydration. When athletes lose a lot of water through sweat and bring back liquid just in form of pure water, something happens in the body where the electrolytes are being imbalanced, and namely sodium is going to be missing. When you sweat, you do exhale sodium into your sweat, and then not bringing this back inside is likely to cause issues which will affect both your nervous system, but also again can be life-threatening. So extreme refueling with water is bad, very bad. In former guidelines, people were encouraged to drink a lot of water, and that led to many incidents. Now most of guidelines will say there is a range of acceptable dehydration during races, but most of new guidelines will emphasize on bringing back sodium. So hydration always contains sodium. Now the amount of sodium and the amount of water that you will need depends. It depends on your sweat rate, something that we'll talk about in a minute. It might depend on your environment, and also it will depend if you're a salty sweater or not. And some people will sweat more salt than others. If you're prone to see visible mark on your clothes when you train, white markings from sweat, then it might be the case with other indicators. The range between a person losing little sodium to high sodium can be quite big, and ideally you would want to, if you're really having problems and you've tried to abide by the guidelines that I will show you, then and it's not working, then you might want to do a sodium test where people will put a patch on your shoulder and you'll do some exercises, and these things cost $100 to $200 depending on the place, but they can be beneficial. If you have not been fueling and hydrating properly, if you have not been using sodium into your training, then any kind of sodium will help, and increasing this, if you see benefit but not enough, might be a good thing. Now there are markers also when you take too much. If your mouth feels like cotton candy, or if you kind of want to back away from salty food, then probably a sign that you're intaking too much sodium. Of course, like sodium intake might raise eyebrows with certain groups of people suffering from high blood pressure, people that are pregnant, people that are having kidney conditions are probably better referred to a sport dietitian and reviewing these things. But you have to note that, again, the sodium you will take during training is a bit different from the sodium you use in your everyday life, where normally the minimal amount of sodium is recommended. What you're trying to achieve here is basically maintain a balance in terms of micronutrients rather than trying to add flavor to something. So this is important. Different kind of group of population will react to training in different ways. Now, from my experiences, most people don't drink enough during the training, and most people don't eat enough during the training. Hydration and fueling, consuming calories, can be mixed together. Again, today we're talking mostly about the water and sodium aspect of this. Even though I did mention, I'm saying again, that failure to intake sodium will also impair your ability to absorb carbohydrates at a faster rate, and failure to intake water will also impair your ability to absorb carbohydrates at a faster rate. So these two things contribute to your ability to absorb carbohydrates. Normally, we do feel thirst at around 2% dehydration. This is when 2% of body weight loss is the point where most people will start to have a first trigger response and being urged to start drinking. This is true for almost everyone, but when people start to get a little older, or certain group of population will have this first response delayed. And this is why, if you're an older athlete, being even more so conscious of timing your hydration strategy regularly during your training is important. Now, as a guideline for most athletes, we recommend drinking something every 15 minutes. Always bring something back. This is good. And this should be done not only when you're running, but also when you're cycling and even swimming. Now, I see a lot of athletes forgetting that even though they are into water, they do sweat. So you do lose sodium and water when you're swimming, especially in longer practices, and failure to have a sport drink or an electrolyte-filled drink next to the pool is definitely going to impair both your performance and your recovery. I made, like always, small calculator to try to explain this and review this in a simple way. It is called sweat rate calculator, and basically what it does is more than a few things. It will just ask you, will calculate sweat rate and not directly sodium loss, because I cannot like this, but it will give you other information. So here we're going to take a test, and let's say I'm going to do a bike ride of 1 hour. And this is something you should do quite often. I recommend doing this every 3 months, especially if you're changing. Let's say I was 79, and then after 1 hour of workout, I dropped to 78, and I had 1 liter. I'm using the metric system again. So fluid loss, I lost 2 liters. Obviously, I consume 1 liter of water. 1 liter metric is 1 kilo, and this is 1 kilo loss. We have 2 liters. And then you have a range. And again, like I said, it's pretty big. It is going to be sodium loss per hour, not in total, but per hour. Now we have 1 hour here. It's going to be between 1200 milligrams to 2400 milligrams. This is quite big. I would recommend starting with the median and maybe playing from this. If you are a person who has these kind of things, so like you can see spots on your t-shirt when you're training, or it does feel very, very salty, your sweat, and maybe go for a higher number. If you're prone to cramps, we'll go for a higher number as well. Here you can see the sweat rate category high. Now, having a high sweat rate is not a bad thing. Actually, people that are heat adapted do sweat more than people that are not, but their sodium loss is lowered. So when you train often in heat, this actually goes up, and this will probably go down. Here we have the body weight loss as a 2.5, which is considered normal. And under this, you're going to start to have a few classification. Now, it is normal to lose weight when you train, some weight. Too much, not good. 0 to 1% body weight loss through your training or through your race is minimal and is not often recommended. This often indicates that you might be overhydrating, and it can be a problem in 2 ways. First, you can increase your risk of bloating. Second, you might increase the risk of sodium imbalance. A lot of people that do tend to be here tend to be drinking more water than water with electrolytes, and therefore increasing their risk of hyponatremia, this condition I mentioned. So this is usually not very good. 1 to 3% is considered normal. This shows very little negative negative impact into performance. Traditionally, this is what is recommended for athletes. Some studies show that 3% is not great, but others don't. Actually, the 3 to 4% is becoming the new normal. So like new studies are showing that this higher body weight loss percentage is actually okay with events for trained athletes. So this might not also impact performance. Again, this is like older studies and newer studies. 4 to 5 definitely start to show impairment. So this is already pretty like something to avoid. And at 5%, like I say, is extreme and probably already impacting your health. So something to try to avoid at all costs. The risk of having heat stroke is increased there because thermal regulation is going to be impaired drastically. So again, you would want to be in between this. I'm going to add a mention here just to make it clear when you use the calculators, then you have a reminder. I did include some pre-exercise hydration guidelines. So again, training or racing, do start with hydration in your mind. Ideally, if you can pee before the race, fantastic, but you do want to be well hydrated. Starting hypohydrated, so with already a lower plasma volume than ideal, will already impact your performance and you're sabotaging yourself from the get-go. So you do want to make sure that you do have liquid in your body and you're fully hydrated. Another guidelines, consuming a bit of water with sodium, 1 to 2 hours, and this will be what I would recommend, 500-750 millimeters with 300-700 milligrams of sodium. Some safety consideration I mentioned. So with the older athlete, we mentioned this. Extreme dehydration, we did mention this. Higher altitude, also like this is important. So if you do train very, very high, or if you do like mountain climbing, then you will have to be a bit more conscious about this frequent hydration that I mentioned. And again, like, don't take my word for it. Just if you have any issues, if you think you have any problem, do consult with a professional dietitian rather than looking through this through the lens of a YouTube video. Post-exercise rehydration guidelines. So these are the guidelines aiming to finish 150% of fluid loss within 3 hours after exercise for optimal recovery. And again, not only water, but water with electrolytes, so sodium mostly. It's sodium, potassium, but sodium is going to be the most important. You do have some other information. So if you use table salt, not everyone uses table salt. Remember, it's about 40% sodium. So 1 gram of table salt is not 1 gram of sodium. It's not equal. 1 tablespoon will be about 2,000 milliliters. But then again, the taste is pretty strong and it's not suitable for everyone. If you do buy things online, things like sodium citrate will be often used, as it doesn't taste as salty as table salt would. Electrolyte drinks are great for recovery, and pretzel, pickles, olive, whatever. Also mentioning vegetable juice soup often are very rich in sodium, which is bad for everyday life and for older people suffering from blood pressure. But because they are very rich in sodium, they can be good strategies for bringing back sodium post-exercise. I'm including another thing just as a reminder, a heat table index. So like, this is basically when to be careful, and this is going to magnify the amount of sweat you're going to lose because temperatures are heightened. You have it in metric and in imperial, but basically this is your temperature here in degrees from 27 to 43 or from 80 to 110. And then you have your humidity factor from 40 to 100% humidity. So this will be like in South Asia, if you go in places like in Hong Kong or Malaysia or Indonesia or all these areas where you might be affected by the monsoon and you have races happening, then people will train very, very early in the morning and your chances of suffering is going to be heightened. And again, like, you do have caution, extreme caution, danger, and extreme danger. So if it's 30 degrees and we're talking about an 80% humidity, then it does feel like 37 degrees, and it's already like pretty bad. If it was 90%, we're like feeling like 40 degrees. And I don't know if you've trained by 40 degrees or 41 degrees Celsius, or the equivalent will be 105 degrees Fahrenheit. It is very hard and dangerous, and your heart is going to be suffering. So if you are in this kind of situation, then do account for your change in sweat rate. If possible, also use things that are cold and can cool you down. Hydrate very often. Put some ice in your water bowls if you can. But yeah, just be mindful of this overall, and do redo another sweat test in this environment to make sure. The only few times I've seen professional Kenyan failing into races was in a race in East China, and again, it was maybe 30 degrees Celsius but with a very high degree of humidity, maybe in 90, and 3 professional runners just collapsed on the side of the road because of the inability of the body to push away the heat. And they're basically, your sweat and the humidity on the outside is trapping the heat inside your body and just start cooking, and then you have to shut down. It's pretty dangerous. If this happens, best thing to do is trying to cool down your body as fast as possible. So ice cream or cold bath and whatnot. Again, I would refer to a medical practitioner for these kind of things. And that's about it. If you have any questions, then feel free to ask. I hope that this is helpful. I will see you next time.